Welcome to Psychology of Pilgrimage. This episode is devoted to reflecting on the first 15 episodes of the podcast. This episode was intended to be episode number 15, but was bumped back 1 week due to my interview with Michael DiGiovanna about the death of Pope Francis, as well as the canonization of Carlo Acutis. This episode is a reflection in this action, reflection, action model that I typically employ both in my teaching and in my research and in evaluation. And so I've decided to implement this also with the podcast to get episodes out, to survey guests and listeners and reflect on the episodes myself, and then implement new action steps after I gather data about where the current state of the podcast is. So my conversation partner for today is one of my favorite people in the entire world. My daughter, Ayla Warfield, who is a freshman in high school and has really been on this journey of pilgrimage, both as a concept and the research and my work since the beginning. I was barely pregnant with Ayla when I decided to focus the topic of my PhD research on the therapeutic value of pilgrimages. So literally this line of research has tracked Ayla's life, and she has been an integral part of my thinking and the reflection about pilgrimages, as well as the experience of pilgrimages. And so we thought it would be fun to take some time today to dialogue about the new Psychology of Pilgrimage podcast, and we'll get into a little bit later also about Ayla's thoughts on pilgrimage. And part of the reason that I asked her to be here today is because she has so many wonderful thoughts about the reach of the podcast, about the topics for the podcast, as well as how to improve on the podcast. And she has made a lot of really outstanding observations from the episode, the very first episode, to where we are now. And so I thought it would be fun to be able to talk to someone who is so intricately involved in this podcast, as well as obviously in my life. So today's episode is going to focus on a few aspects of this podcast. The first is what it's been like to start a podcast from the very beginning, particularly the video element of a podcast, which is completely new to me and has changed my thinking a bit about podcasts in general, but also about the study of pilgrimages in particular. So we'll talk about the structural process of starting a podcast. And we're going to talk about the episode themes. So I've looked across all of the episodes and reviewed all the transcripts and have extrapolated themes that are consistent across all of the episodes. We're going to then talk about guest feedback. I asked all of the podcast guests for episodes 1 through 14 about their feedback, what it was like to be a guest, how their thinking may have changed, what recommendations they have for the future. And so we'll spend some time talking about that. I think it's also a really good time to say thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of the guests who have been on the podcast so far. They're incredible people. I've gotten to know really important parts of their work and their life through interviewing them. And we wouldn't even be talking right now without the guests. And so for those of you who have been guests, I truly appreciate your time. I appreciate your investment into this new endeavor for me. And I appreciate how enthusiastically you have embraced the video component of getting your work out to a new audience, as well as just being able to dialogue about what's important to you. So thank you, thank you, thank you to all of the guests that have been on Psychology of Pilgrimage thus far. I also gathered listener feedback, and so we'll talk a bit about that. We had a live event that was affiliated with the podcast a couple of weeks ago with Gilles Lejeune, and so we're going to be talking about the feedback from attendees of that event, or attendees from that event, I should say. And then I'm going to talk about where I'm heading for the next bit with the podcast. I think it's a bit too early to really track sort of trends overall, but I'm going to give information about where we are and where I'd like to see the podcast go in the future. So I've also asked Ayla to prepare some questions around each of these areas. I don't actually know what she's going to ask me completely. So that's going to be fun to be able to respond as an interviewee and not just an interviewer or a host of a podcast. So without further ado, Ayla, I'll let you start with the first question.
Yeah, so I guess when I was kind of coming up with these, I wanted to obviously reflect the themes and whatnot. So I guess my first question is, what inspired you in the beginning when you started the podcast? And now that we're here, I mean, episode 16, looking back 15 episodes back, what is going to keep you going?
I think what inspired me to start the podcast is what has inspired me to study pilgrimage, which I've been doing now since for over a decade, really since 2010. Like I said, it sort of tracks with your life. And and you went on one of the first big pilgrimages with me in utero. You didn't realize it at the time, but you were there. Um, and so what inspires me now to do this podcast is I absolutely love talking to people about their pilgrimages. It's inspiring. I think it gets to the heart of what makes us human. It gets to the heart of how we make meaning. And it's such an interesting way to get to know people and to understand how they frame meaning in their lives by what has been significant in pilgrimages for them. It's also inspiring to hear from other academics who study pilgrimage, to hear their disciplinary standpoints, whether that's from medieval history or archaeology or anthropology or digital humanities. All of the ways that we look at pilgrimage is so intriguing to me, and I get a fuller sense of what pilgrimage phenomena are when I talk to other scholars who study this. And they're really incredible people. I have never met a pilgrimage scholar who didn't have a really interesting, incredible life narrative. And so it's been an honor to be able to speak to them about that. And I also am really interested in talking to people who live at pilgrimage sites. Oftentimes, we don't hear much from them, and yet they are incredible hosts to people who are coming into these sites. And so for me, it's all about the people, which is why this podcast is The Psychology of Pilgrimage, which is my focus. I want to understand and amplify the voices of people in their work and in their pilgrimage experiences. So that's what inspired me to, or what prompted me to start the podcast. What was the second part of your question?
Well, the second part of my question was, what are you going to do in the future? What kind of keeps you going, and what is going to amplify that in later episodes as we kind of continue on this journey?
I think I'm going to continue in the same track, and we'll talk a little bit more about the specific kinds of changes or additions that will be coming in the future. So I'll wait to answer that more towards the end, but I'm going to keep going. This is incredible work. I'm so enthusiastic and inspired, and we talk about it a lot, don't we? About who I've interviewed and what I've learned. And that's another part I think that's been so fascinating is I get to keep learning. It's a fascinating part of my life that I love to learn. I'm naturally curious. And so I've gotten to learn new terminology and about new pilgrimage sites and about new ways of seeing pilgrimage. And I've gotten to meet and learn about new people too. And so that's been wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, in your kind of response, you talked a lot about, I mean, obviously in our private conversations, we do talk about a lot of this, but you mentioned the fact that the people who you've interviewed have really great and amazing ideas that not just contribute to your podcast, but through it can be seen through other people. And so I think it is really important to get, this podcast setting up where people can get their work through. So I just think that's cool. So yeah.
Should we jump into now talking about some of the nuts and bolts of what it's been like to start the podcast, or do you have other questions that are bigger
Yeah,
questions that
I think we can kind of segue that into, I mean, what we were just talking about would segue into my next question, which is, how has it been like for you to go from more of a writing standpoint, so kind of making um, articles or publications? How has it been like for you for to go from writing to on-screen video talking to people, and how was that switch like for you?
well, I think that was the most difficult. It's been an unanticipated challenge for a number of reasons. I think that I am not a person, I'm a pretty private person who is not naturally inclined to be seen. So, this concept of being seen, particularly on social media, on YouTube, uh, just in general, has been visually seen, has been a challenge. And that's caused a lot of anxiety actually initially about what that would be like. I am not a person who's a great fan of seeing myself or hearing myself on recording, so that's been challenging, especially because before this point, when I was doing another podcast called Meaningful Journeys, which was audio only, I had the help of students who would edit, and very often I didn't listen to the final product. And so, but because I'm doing the editing and production of this myself, I'm getting very intimately acquainted with how I look on camera, what I sound like, what lighting is appropriate, what to wear. And I don't have training in this type of information. I don't have a media or journalist background. And so it's been interesting. And I realized that there is a psychology around being seen. And I imagine that a lot of people are encountering this now as more and more people are becoming influencers online, or even if they're not influencers, they're posting a lot of videos and visual content online. And so it's actually opened a new realm of research curiosity for me about what it's like to be seen and perceived online. And so that's been challenging actually. It's been much more difficult than what I thought. And I guess the natural question is, why did I do this in a video format and not audio only? I think that when interviewing people, I think it's nice to be able to see them. I appreciate being able to see my guests, to see their body language, and I think that it gives me a sense. Uh, it's a deeper way to communicate with people and to listen because you're also watching, and so I think it's important for others to see that as well. And I recognize that for some of the guests too, it's the first time that they're being seen in this way. And so that can be a bit anxiety provoking. So let me just transition here. So as I've been talking, I realized that I want to recap actually. So there have been 15 episodes that have been published on YouTube and Spotify. There may be other podcast platforms that have picked it up, but that is where I am primarily publishing the episodes. So I have a YouTube channel called Psychology of Pilgrimage, and the same with Spotify. The podcast is called Psychology of Pilgrimage, and so it's its own channel. I decided to use Riverside as a recording platform because of the ease of use. It's web based. And so, for people who are not familiar with this platform, it's fairly simple, where the account holder initiates a recording link and the recipient then can log into the recording platform via a link. What is also easy, I think it's very user friendly, is the editing process. So there's a transcript that it is embedded and corresponds with the video footage. And so I watch through at least once, sometimes twice, sometimes more, every episode to ensure. I'm also using captions to ensure, particularly place names and people names, are correct. I don't catch everything. Sometimes there are grammatical errors, but I really try to make sure that if places or people are mentioned, that I get the names are correct in the caption. or in the captions. The so the production part for me, maybe other podcasts are different, but for me, there's kind of a whole production loop of identifying the guests, scheduling guests, prepping questions. I always send guests a list of talking points or questions ahead of time. I think it is helpful for people to be able to reflect on their experiences before they are recorded about those experiences. And so I think that that has been helpful, and it has been appreciated, which I'll get into in a few minutes, around the guest feedback. Many guests have talked about the importance of receiving these talking points ahead of time. I also had to learn how to use the technology. I was unfamiliar with Riverside, and so that was interesting. And Ayla can attest to the hours and hours and hours of frustration. I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't. I had to learn it from the beginning. And I am a person who can read instructions, but until I really do it, I'm an action, as I said, an action reflection action type of person and learner. And so I had to actually just record and then learn how to edit really in real time. So to those first couple of guests, I apologize for some of the mistakes. It's been learning a learning process, which has been exciting and really inspiring to learn something new. I think we can all benefit when we take the opportunity to learn something that is hard, something that's new, something that gives us a skill in a new way. And so I have done that. And those of you who are viewing, especially, can probably track exactly where I have been learning and where I've made mistakes. I think in the first episode, it was we were Catherine and I. The interview was fine, but then learning how to produce the episode after we finished recording was a bit challenging. And so Ayla actually had a lot of feedback on that first episode, which was what? Would you like to give the feedback on that first episode?
Um, I did say that in the beginning it did look a little bit like a ransom tape. Respectfully, it was pretty bad. And you were just talking about how, you were spending a lot of time on it. And I actually have a story about that of I went into your office at, I think, when I was getting ready to eat breakfast. Say hi, good morning. You're on your computer, you're editing. Come in, lunch, probably 12 o'clock maybe. You're still editing. Then I come in for dinner. I come up to say hi, and you're still editing. And I believe the exact time you were editing for 10 hours straight on one video. And because everything had to be perfect. And then when you would see something that you thought was perfect, you'd go back like 2 minutes later and then it wouldn't be perfect. And so I, commend you for from episode 1 and now episode, what is it, 16? You have shown and incredible amounts of perseverance through this because I understand full well how it was very hard in the beginning. And I remember actually about 3 days after that episode, I mean, maybe or whatnot, but by episode 5, I came in your office and you were just editing like a pro. I was like, what's going on? Where'd you learn how to do this? And I remember those were my exact words. So it, it just shows that learning is, normal. So yeah.
And I think it would be helpful to hear the editing that I was doing was, I do not remove content, really any significant content. I was thinking it was more around the layout, which I actually, Riverside has an AI feature which will generate what's called a smart layout. I don't actually care for that feature. I think it's a good start, but I prefer to do that myself. So the layout of who's speaking, or if it's side by side, I enjoy doing that myself. I think it cannot replace actually human insight. So I don't love the AI feature of the smart layout. I was also removing a lot of ums or pauses and realized there's really no need to do that. We have arrived at a point in from a production and a listening standpoint where we're used to hearing normal conversations, which have pauses and ums and kind of extra little, and I mean, and like that is part of conversation. And so I've stopped removing these types of small little utterances, and that has immensely decreased the amount of editing time. So the other editing piece that I will do at times is add in music or images, and especially the episode that I did regarding the Devil Dog Fountain, I added in a lot of images because they were critical to what I was talking about. So that is also a benefit of Riverside, is the ability to overlay images and video even. I don't think I've actually done video yet, but maybe I will in the future, and certainly music. And so there is this whole production piece, and that's why people have production teams, because these are highly skilled, and it gives me so much more appreciation for production teams and lighting technicians, and all of the people that are involved in major productions. This is not the realm for novices, and I fully acknowledge I do not have that skill, but I'm rolling with it. And I think there has been a psychological part of doing it, even though it's not perfect, which is difficult for me. That's that's a difficult element for me to not do everything where I think it's perfect, even though it may not be perfect. In my mind, it needs to be as close as possible, and so that can really be frustrating. And I've let go a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of a theme earlier was the fact that, I mean, a question I even asked was, how's it been like for you from switching from writing, articles and whatnot to podcasting, in-person video type of things? And I think one main thing is the fact that the difference is with articles, you can go back and you can edit it all you want to make it perfect because it's an article, it's writing. But with like a podcast, you want to make it feel more, realistic and normal and human conversation where you can't kind of do that in writing. So I think that's also been a big thing that you've kind of faced, where understanding that podcasting when it's person to person is much more different than writing. It's the same principles, but it's completely different. Um, so, I mean, as an avid listener of this podcast, I can say that from the first 5 episodes to now, there's been a lot of change, and a lot of change that I like, and a lot of things that I brought up have been changed. So, yeah.
Can you expand on that, about what some of the changes that you,
Oh, yes.
because you've listened to a lot. Well, you listen very critically to each episode, which I
Yeah.
appreciate. You have given really invaluable feedback.
Yeah, so a couple of things for starting off with something that you just said, which is the constant editing of the uhs or the you knows that make it more perfect and whatnot. Um, in the beginning of the podcast, those moments seemed very clicky, and didn't seem natural. You could tell that there was cuts, you could tell that there was external kind of silencing on it. Whereas in these new episodes, it sounds like a conversation. That's something that I brought up.
Um, so yeah, we've talked about technical aspects of editing, ums and I knows, and keeping the flow more natural. We've talked about lighting. We've talked about what it's like to be seen. The other part of this podcast that has been fairly new to me has been promoting it. So we're talking about the recording of interviews, recording with guests, I should say recording the episodes. And then there is the editing and production piece, and then there's the promotion part of this, which has also been new to me because of I don't have a huge social media presence. And so I am learning. I haven't had to learn. I am learning a lot about promotion. And so typically I promote the episodes on my LinkedIn account. I promote episodes of course, on YouTube through also publishing shorts, which I also want to talk about because this is something unique that I'll just park that and come back to it. We have started a TikTok account and Instagram, and also I had a pre-existing Twitter or X account which has been used kind of marginally. Um, I see the most engagement. Okay, so I think they're different. TikTok, there's kind of an immediate feedback because you can see people liking um, the videos. I think LinkedIn is interesting because many of the guests I'm connected with on LinkedIn, and so we are sharing to our respective networks. And I find that to be important because of exposure, but also it's helpful to see the comments that other people's networks leave about the episodes. That's really helpful feedback for me. And so I have appreciated that. Um, Also on Instagram, I'm posting, about new episodes or the shorts. I want to now pause and talk about shorts. This is an element of this podcast that has been really a surprise and interesting. It has tapped into kind of a creative part of me where I can sometimes add music, or I can select moments from the episodes that I think are important or maybe riveting or give a good sense of who a guest is or what kind of capture the essence of what they're saying. Fun. I'm loving creating the shorts. The shorts are really, really cool for me. And so I have started, of course, posting shorts on YouTube, which I didn't realize could be done at the beginning. So again, I'm learning YouTube. And then the shorts can also be posted as reels or in whatever they're called on different platforms. And so that's been like an enjoyable. I mean, the whole thing is enjoyable, but I've really had a lot of fun creating shorts. And the Riverside platform uh, has a feature that so the little segment can be highlighted in the transcript, and a short can be immediately made from that, and that has been very enjoyable. I remember a Sunday where I basically spent 12 hours creating shorts, and it was just fun. It was a fun day.
Yeah, and as a listener and also a watcher, it's been very fun for me to look at those shorts, and at times I was even there when those shorts were being created. And it's very riveting to see content that is nice and, formatted to be put out. And yeah,
So shorts are cool.
one could say.
One could say shorts are cool. Um, I also want to just give a little bit of a summary for people who may or may not have seen all of the episodes. I guess I talked about the episode type. So I've interviewed several authors, I've interviewed several academics who study an element of pilgrimage. I've talked about my own research in one episode, which was a shorter episode that I did on the Devil Dog Fountain. We had a live event. And then we also had an episode that was more of a sort of here and now commentary on something that was happening, which was the death of Pope Francis and then also the canonization of Carlo Acutis. And so I like the breadth of the episodes. That's something that I'm going to stick with. As I said, I want to interview more people who are living at pilgrimage sites, but I like that the breadth of the guests. What do you think about the guests, Ayla?
So, on that, I think it's been very fun to be able to see all people from different backgrounds, some people with kind of the same background, and people with their own respective pilgrimage sites or pilgrimage experiences share one kind of common thing, which is that they love what they do. And it, I, I can't really explain it. It's just very refreshing and cool to see all these different people have such a passion for something and be able to talk in detail about it. So that's been, I mean, my favorite part of, the guests. I mean, if we want to go into the actual episodes, I love the artifacts. That's one of my favorite parts. I just I love it.
We'll come back to that. We'll come back to the artifacts in just a moment. I want to wrap up this sort of first theme of the structural part of starting the podcast by just giving some numbers. I, as a researcher, it's important to gather data, and also to so data can take the form of metrics, which I'm going to share some YouTube and Spotify metrics, some of the analytics, and also to gather information, like I said, through semi-structured interviews or some type of survey from people who are impacted or listening or part of the work. So at this point, as of today, um, I have published 47 videos. 16 of those are full-length podcast episodes that range from about 50 minutes to an hour and a half. I think the one with Michael was over 2 hours. And then my episode on the Devil Dog Fountain, I think it was not 50 minutes. It was less than 50, sub 50 minutes. So that's a range, but on average, the podcast episodes are about an hour. Um, of the remaining videos that have been published, these have been shorts, which range in length from 9 or 10 seconds up to, I think YouTube allows 3 minutes. I don't know if I actually have a 3-minute video, but so those are shorter in length. The YouTube channel has been visited 14,703 times, which is shocking to me. That's a lot of visits. So that was as of this morning. I double checked, and 176 hours of watch time across all the videos. The short that has the most views is the one where I talk about attachment theory a bit, and that has 1,500 views. And that is informing a decision recommendation, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. The Spotify channel has 15 subscribers, and there's 46 on the YouTube. So it's about a subscriber per video, which obviously I want to bump up exponentially, but that's where we are right now. So if you're hearing or listening to this, subscribe to the channel. It's important. I remember hearing when Ayla was little, watching videos on like toy videos, people talking about like and subscribe, and I didn't fully understand it. But now, as somebody who is producing videos and has a YouTube channel, I'm fully on board with the like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. It makes a difference. For the viewership in terms of geographic location, in rank order: U.S., U.K., Canada, Australia, Germany, Sweden, and then Ireland. Spotify is similar, actually, with the U.S., Canada, U.K., Sweden, and Germany being so. It's kind of a different order, which is interesting to see that there are more people in yeah, it's kind of actually similar. So that's interesting. But for some folks, they prefer, I think, listening on Spotify versus watching on YouTube. The age demographic is also similar between the two platforms. For YouTube, the number one age demographic is 55 to 64, followed by 35 to 44, followed by 45 to 54. So really the demographic that this is resonating with is really within the age range of 35 to 64. Spotify breaks down the age category in a little bit different way, but it's still, so 35 to 44 is number one, and 45 to 59 is number two. So it's trending the same way across or between both platforms. The episodes typically peak in viewership on YouTube later the day that it's posted and the day after. And then it kind of steps down after that. It declines after that. And the same is the case with Spotify. So what that's telling me is that people are watching or listening the day that the episode is released. I'd like to now transition into talking about the episode themes. I am a qualitative, I've done mixed methods research, but I'm primarily a qualitative researcher. And so I have found actually the podcast transcripts to be similar in content and themes as the research that I have done with hundreds of pilgrims at this point, which is encouraging. And I will say there's a caveat to this, which is I'm asking similar questions. And so the interviewees are primed to respond to certain questions about their experiences or their background or their kind of life history in the same way as when I conduct interviews with pilgrims or people who are living at pilgrimage sites. So there's been a lot of continuity in this, which has also made me realize that podcasting can be used as a research tool. And so I'm in the process of actually writing a publication about this because I think, it's what I'm doing already. So I want to transition now into talking about some of the themes that I have identified across all episodes. And I'll also give it back to Ayla to ask some questions because I think you're prepared to also enhance our conversation with some questions.
Yeah, so my first question would be, which I believe is what you were about to get into, what are these themes? I mean, what have you noticed as the interviewer? I mean, in the in the podcast talking to them and also when you're editing it, what have you noticed the themes be?
So some of the themes have been driven by myself. So I always want to hear about an artifact or something that someone has brought back, which can include a tangible piece like a rock or uh, uh, a religious artifact or a book or even a memory. Some people have talked about the memory being the artifact, which is wonderful. Um, so the methodology also I think is important. So I print all the transcripts from the interviews and I read through them and I look at them line by line and I draw themes from each individual transcript, like what was the theme of each episode, and then I'm comparing them across at this point all 15 episodes. So that's the place that I want to focus on. Are the themes that I've been identified are the themes that I've been identified across all episodes. So here are a couple of them. Memory and trauma, which is interesting, given the fact that my own research right now is focused on pilgrimages to World War I battlefields and places of memory. This is unsurprising because I've selected guests who have focused on this same area, especially World War I pilgrimages. But also, memory and trauma was addressed in other episodes that did not necessarily have to do with war pilgrimages. Reby Huntman's episode, for example, also addressed memory and trauma. A second theme is healing and identity. These are important hallmarks of my work, and so it's been interesting to see. I had an interest in healing and identity, especially from a psychological and mental health standpoint, and it's been interesting to see those themes emerge across the episodes. Military pilgrimage is a theme, primarily because I have been interviewing people who are working in this space. Another theme is I just realized my microphone has not even been in front of me. So sorry if suddenly my my sound now changes. Another theme is place and nature, which has been an important part of my work over the last couple of years. And so I'm now more attuned to the theme of place and nature. Another theme that has emerged is commercialization, in talking about how commercial sites and places of business and how the economy is impacted by pilgrimage. And then the last theme has to do with cultural identity and cultural and to a large extent national identity. So I will be talking more about these themes in the article that I'm writing about this, and I don't want to get into getting bogged down in all of the verbatim quotes that substantiate the themes, but I will be publishing a piece on this in the future, and so people who are interested can read this, and I'll probably also post this on my website, so people can see the article.
Yeah, another thing that I would say is the fact that um, the change in a person, both physically and mentally, on going on a pilgrimage. You change, you have to adapt to the climate or the culture of the people around you in your this specific pilgrimage. And you also have to change mentally. So you have to change your mindset. You have to essentially live in the shoes of the people who have come before you on your journey. So I think pilgrimage is not just a walk through the woods or going up a couple of stairs. It's a change in the person that affects their life afterwards, in both who they are and how they present. So
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Isla. You and I have talked a lot about this, and actually, I should have listed that. I will list this as another theme. This internal transformation or psychological transformation or transformation of the interior. I think Michael talked about this in his episode. I want to pause here because you were sharing a story with me yesterday that I wanted you to share during this recording, about some of your favorite moments. They could be considered themes. They could also be moments that you've appreciated that have really resonated with you during the podcast uh, season. This lot, this 3 month period of time. What are the three moments or the three top topics that you've appreciated in the episodes?
So I guess we could just kind of roll into it. My probably my top favorite moment is your episode with Michael, where you talked about that story about the Irish going to Italy on a little tour and them having to change, which is kind of what I just talked about. That is probably my favorite moment in all of your episodes because it's something that I think everyone can kind of resonate with, even if they're not going to a popular pilgrimage site. It's We took a trip to France in 2023, and although we did in our time there visit a bunch of pilgrimage sites, some that you've already talked about, um, the journey of going to a different country where you do have to change. You have to change the way you eat when you travel on a plane. You have to change um, basically the time. Time changes. You have to adapt to the time there, and I think it's that kind of topic is not just something that is for pilgrimage. It's something that I everyone who has traveled either to a pilgrimage or just to a different country or a different place can relate to. So that's probably my favorite moment. If I don't necessarily have favorite moments per episode, I think themes that you just kind of talked about are my favorite. So I guess second um, is the I talked about it earlier with the different guests and it being so diverse in their fields of work, and that is another favorite part because I believe I mentioned this earlier, but all of the people who you've interviewed, all of your guests, are different. They are all different people. They have all gone to different pilgrimages, and although their experiences are theirs, it's theirs. It can be no one else's, because it's their pilgrimage, it's their experience. One common theme throughout is changing. It is, yeah,
I think you also mentioned that you really appreciated Catherine's episode because it gave you an understanding about how global pilgrimages are.
yeah. Thank you. I was kind of forgetting, but Yeah, it's interesting to kind of look in that lens of it's not just the most popular one. It's not just Christ the Redeemer. It's not, Vimy. It's people put meaning on different things globally. So where we in the United States, me as a person, I may find, say, Belleau Wood, a pilgrimage site, my favorite. But someone in, say, lower parts of Eastern Asia may say something different. But their experiences are different, but they're all the same in what the effect is. So that's a theme that I think is universal and is important. It's one of my favorites. So yeah.
You know, I got to stop and pause and ask about Belleau Wood, because I think it's important for people listening or watching to hear about your experience as an individual, but this is also the experience of someone who at the time was 11 years old, and you had a profound experience in Belleau Wood, which was yours alone. You didn't have a profound experience because of my work or me talking about it. And if you're comfortable, I'd like for you to take this opportunity and share about what it was like for you to be on a pilgrimage there.
Yeah, so I think it's good to mention that the day that we went to Belleau Wood, it was very dark. It was gloomy. It was misting, raining, um, very humid. It was just a glum day, which, absentmindedly is kind of perfect for where we were, the setting of where we were. And this was when we were walking through the woods. And I remember that day I was feeling a little down. I mean, the weather was gross. It was just, I was not necessarily having the best day of my life. And I remember walking through the woods, and you guys were reading the plaques that are in there. And I was just kind of brushing it off. I don't really care. I mean, I hear about this stuff all the time at home. So what do I need to know? And I kind of was more up ahead of you guys. And I stopped because I wanted to. It was something inside of me that just said stop and look around, and I don't even know why. It was just something that came out of the blue, and so I did. And I stopped and I looked around, and I could almost see, not necessarily physically, but in my mind's eye, I could almost see soldiers running, walking. Then I started to kind of look around at the trees and go, people were here. And one moment that kind of freaked me out in the moment, but looking back, it was very profound, was there's a bit of a breeze, and then the breeze kind of picked up and turned into wind. And the wind, what happens when wind goes against trees, it creates this whooshing noise. And although in my brain I knew it was just wind, I felt like it sounded like screams. And it may have just been in my mind, but I just kind of paused and like everything just kind of stopped for me in those woods. And I just remember kind of going back and then just reading the plaques and going, okay, like this this is real. Like this, it kind of put everything into perspective for me. Like I knew the history of it. I knew who was here. I knew what happened, but that small, very profound moment put everything into a clearer lens. So yeah.
So you're addressing what felt like an encounter with something outside of yourself, and the setting inside the woods frames the backdrop for that.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I was going to segue into this next part, which is the actual field, where a lot of the fighting went down, where I didn't have that profound experience. I didn't have that, more immersive part of whoa, like, like this is real. And I was kind of thinking about it the other day while I was kind of preparing for this, and I know in my conversation that I had with you a couple of days ago, we talked about this, and that is you look over and there is a big farm. Although that farm has probably been there for 100 years, owned by some family, they had this equipment. It's industrialized equipment, tractors that run on industrialized motors, big, big cars that are meant for the fields. And I think why it took me out of the experience is the fact that in the woods there is none of that. It preserves the, I'm not going to call it innocence because war is by no means innocent, but it preserves the kind of setting in which it took place in. And out in that field, it just, I didn't, yeah.
I've experienced many similarities to what you're describing inside the woods, and it's impacted me so much that I've written about it, and I there's one of the chapters in an edited book that is coming out hopefully this summer, talks about exactly this, about the natural features inside the woods and how they offer particular affordances for pilgrims, that interacting with the trees, seeing them, thinking about the trees, the dirt, the boulders and the rocks and the pathways, and even the flowers that blossom. The experience, I think, of being there is heightened by these natural features, and I think you and I share a similar uh, preference for being in quiet spaces in nature, and to us that is sacred. And so I think we experience pilgrimage sites in ways that align with that, where we feel closer to God, or a sense of supernatural energy when we're in more quiet natural spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. I talked to you about this a couple days ago, but I share a great disdain for when pilgrimage sites become tourist attractions, where it's not people going to visit these places to go on the pilgrimage of it. It's people going to these places as a tourist. So you mentioned, I think yesterday, Mont Saint Michel. I went there for my birthday. It was very fun, but it didn't feel like a pilgrimage that it is. It felt like I was on tour. It felt like I was surrounded by people who were taking pictures to post online, taking family photos the next to Mont Saint Michel, and although that's perfectly normal, there's nothing wrong with that, and I don't hold any disdain for that. I do hold some resentment to people taking that and making it a tourist attraction, where it doesn't feel like I'm going on a pilgrimage. It doesn't feel as immersive or real. It feels rather synthetic and fabricated. And that's partially why not partially, it's completely why I loved being in the woods, because it felt real. It didn't feel fake. It felt like they were here. So that's a big reason why. And for future reference, how to not make pilgrimage sites feel fake and touristy.
There's a lot of people that are doing research about exactly that, because it becomes an issue, doesn't it? Where people feel a sense of connection to a place, which drives more people and more visitors and more pilgrims and more tourists coming to the place, and then the numbers can be driven up, and then this commercialization aspect takes over, and it no longer quote unquote feels like a pilgrimage site, or maybe even is a pilgrimage site because of the vast numbers of people who are visiting it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did you have any other questions or comments about the themes of the episodes?
I don't have any questions, and actually, I don't think I have any comments. I think we summarized it pretty good. So,
Okay. The next piece of this reflection episode that I wanted to address is the experience as stated by the podcast guests themselves. As I mentioned earlier, I asked all of the guests for episodes up to this point to reflect on four areas. The one I asked them, how did you experience the podcast as a guest? The second question was, how did our discussion shape your thoughts about pilgrimage overall? The third question was, how, if at all, did the conversation impact your future work or your ideas? And the fourth was, what feedback do you have for future recordings, future guests, or direction for the podcast? This collaborative piece is really important to me, both as a colleague for many of these people in terms of those who are within the academic community, and also I want guests to get something out of being a guest, and that's wide ranging. And I just wanted to offer a couple of comments during this episode. Again, more will be in the article that I'm writing. So here are a couple of comments on the question, how did you experience the podcast as a guest? One person said, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I felt it was well organized, and it was great to share my research in a slightly different way and potentially with a new audience. Another said, I found it fun and explorative, an open space where I roam pretty much anywhere without feeling restricted, and thoughtful internal landscape questions which probe the key pilgrim terrain, our psychology. In terms of the second question, how did our discussion shape your thoughts about pilgrimage overall? One guest said, it made me more aware of the various forms pilgrimage can take and the academic work being carried out. Another said, I think the discussion required me to think about which parts of my work relate more directly to pilgrimage or could be reframed that way, and which parts do not or cannot. It honestly made me think I should engage pilgrimage conversations more, and I've meant to ask you since then what some good entry points might be. In terms of the third question about the impact of our conversation on work, one guest said, it's given me lots of food for thought for future research, including considering how pilgrimages differed across battlefronts, time periods, and how these intersect with memory studies. Another said, it made me feel I needed to go into my own space more to discover who I am really becoming as a pilgrim, as a constantly evolving self. Uh, on the question, what feedback do you have? One guest said, I truly enjoyed the conversational aspect of my podcast, and I am sure you will use this format. In the future, having the conversations occur in the field would be really interesting. Yeah, I agree with that too. That's a fantastic idea. Another guest said, keep going with the psychological focus and open forum feel. And another one said, keep up the focus you had in asking about why people are doing what they do and what it means for them. That can maybe help others in their work in trying to find meaningful activities within the subject. So this feedback is really invaluable to me. Again, the guests have formed the early structure of this podcast. They'll continue to form the structure. They will continue to be prioritized, and so I really appreciate the feedback that people took the time to give.
Yeah, I mean, from those four kind of sections, I think the most important ones are how did your kind of opinions or thoughts change after our conversation and the reflection part of that survey, because it shows what you are wanting to do with that first part of that question, which is, you know, how did you change, and it shows that you're not only the people who you're talking to are also being, you know, influenced, and they're also being kind of thinking about what they, you know, thinking about pilgrimage. And then that last one, reflection, is what this whole episode is about, which I think is quite important. And I think from episode 1 and now episode 16, you've showed a lot of reflection, excuse me, on what you've done, how you've edited things. You've taken their criticism, and I know I've shared some criticism, and you've made remarkable, corrections to it. So hat tip to you for that. And yeah.
Thank you, Ayla. Did you have any other commentary about the feedback from guests? Because I'm also going to talk about some listener feedback and some feedback that I received about the live event that we did.
Um, yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot that like I don't disagree with. I think everything that was said was true. I mean, it's their own experiences, and I think that everyone, you're not at your peak yet. You're not finished. This journey is still gonna go, and there is still plenty of room left to work. You're gonna make mistakes, and so nothing that was said I disagree with. So.
All right. Listener feedback. I did request listeners to contact me, and some did. And listeners, thank you very much for giving the feedback. Listeners and viewers, always, yes, thank you, hearts to the listeners. Always am open for feedback and ideas. And the email address where you can contact me is psychologyofpilgrimage@gmail.com. Here are some comments that listeners have said. I like the interviews. I'm learning a lot about pilgrimage. Good variety of guests. I want to hear more of psychological mechanisms about pilgrimages. It would be cool to hear from pilgrims while they are on a pilgrimage. That's a great idea. This podcast brings together many elements of pilgrimages in one place. And I do a lot of battlefield tours, and I am now looking back and seeing how many of these tours were actually pilgrimages, but I didn't call them a pilgrimage at the time. So that's important feedback. And I'll address some of the recommendations that take into account this feedback.
Yeah, that second one is genuinely what I was talking about earlier, which is anything technically could be classified as a pilgrimage. It just matters how much you put meaning on it. Um, a lot of people will go on journeys, but they don't consider it pilgrimages because it's just a journey. Then they go back and they listen, obviously, to the podcast, or even do their own research. They go, "Hey, I went on a pilgrimage," and even though they didn't think it in the moment, their experience, which is very important, shares and reflects with a community of people who share the same. So that is again very, very cool and important. Something that I take interest to. So mhm.
So the live event that we did that was associated with the podcast was a 2-hour event held on Zoom, and it was an opportunity to talk with and hear from my colleague and friend Gilles Lajean, who is a local battlefield guide in France. And he has been visiting Belleau Wood since he was a child around the age of 9. And so the attendees, most of them were very interested in meeting him, and it was a fantastic 2-hour event. It was fantastic to hear from Gilles again in this type of forum, and also to be a part of the conversation that ensued with the attendees. And so I asked the attendees for feedback about the event, and here are some of their comments. Again, there'll be more detail in the article that I'm writing about this. I had never heard about battlefield pilgrimages, but I think the Zoom meeting would have been very beneficial to those planning on scheduling a pilgrimage in order to know what information and expertise is available to leverage in making their pilgrimage. So this was an important comment in terms of the practical aspects of going on a battlefield pilgrimage. I did not realize that battlefield pilgrimages were such a common thing. One thinks of the Gold Star Mothers pilgrimages, but I had no idea that so many people were still interested in visiting and memorializing World War I. I feel like my family has a closer connection than most these days due to the generational oddities that left me, an elder millennial, with a great uncle who was MIA/KIA in 1918. And it is refreshing to know that the Great War hasn't been as forgotten as it sometimes seems. I knew there were pilgrimages to World War II sites like Normandy, but was not aware of others. This webinar exceeded my expectations. Thanks for all of your effort with World War I pilgrimages. This is very meaningful to families. And the last comment, I so appreciate your work on this topic and am excited to learn more as we plan our own pilgrimage. So that was really cool for me to get to meet people who are planning on going on a pilgrimage. I didn't know them before this point, and they have a deep tie to Belleau Wood and to the area around Soissons where their great uncle was killed. And so being able to be a part of someone else's pilgrimage was so inspiring, so incredible. And so I feel really great about being able to facilitate this kind of connection, especially to Gilles, between this particular family and Gilles, because now he will be helping them with their pilgrimage to where their great uncle was killed. So that was cool. The live event was really enjoyable and inspiring, and so that is definitely something that will continue on the horizon.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you're able to implement so many different things into so many different people's minds that they didn't know before. I mean, that just comes with being able to teach people and, have people be able to learn through what you're doing, but to actually see and to have people write to you and write back the fact that what you're doing has directly affected their life and how they view something that they're passionate about, or maybe they weren't passionate about, but they are now, is nothing short of amazing. So honestly, amazing. It's
Yeah, that one is really very special to me because this particular family has been wanting to make a pilgrimage to France for a number of years, and they're finally going to do it next year. And it's such an honor to be part of connecting them with Gilles and being able to know that that pilgrimage that they've been wanting to make at least for several years, I think in one case actually for decades, is going to happen. What a Yeah, just what an honor that they found this event that we were doing online and were able to be there. I think now is probably a good point to transition to the last segment of this episode, which is to consider recommendations for future episodes and kind of the greater concept of psychology of pilgrimage as I envision it in terms of a channel or a concept. Um, I'm going to continue the interview format, the weekly interviews with guests. I'm not going to change that. I'm enjoying that, and what has been really cool also is to hear guests talk about linking their work with other people's work that they've heard in another episode. And so this like stitching together, making something that's kind of bigger, this gestalt kind of concept of this is bigger than the sum of its parts. It becomes more significant than each individual piece together is is such a cool part of my work. Um, I am going to. I have read and taken into consideration, and it's an observation that I've made myself as well. So it's all kind of aligning to add more content around the psychological constructs that apply to pilgrimage, and so I'm going to be either adding full length episodes or maybe shorter, maybe 10-minute, 15-minute episodes on the psychological research and kind of constructs around belongingness and meaning making and these types of psychological concepts and how they apply to pilgrimage. Maybe the link has not directly occurred within the psychological literature, but I'm going to start making that link. I have received feedback about people wanting to hear about different types of pilgrimages that happen around the world, and so that's on my radar to address. I definitely want to continue the live events. The people who attended the first one have interest in hearing more about post World War I pilgrimages, which I am happy to keep that up. I mean, that is my jam right now, and so I will definitely be facilitating more live events that week, more conversations, perhaps a book club or a book study piece to this, which sounds interesting. I will probably also be publishing thoughts on episodes where I'll offer commentary on episodes and we'll post those on my website. And then also, I think I'd like to focus on developing a stronger community of people who are interested in the psychology of pilgrimage. And so I'm considering how to do that either through a newsletter or some type of um, community membership community, something to that effect, so that people can not only connect with me but connect with each other. There is a growing interest in pilgrimages and a growing practice of pilgrimages worldwide, and so it would be wonderful to be able to help facilitate a community around that's focused on the psychology of pilgrimage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are all amazing ideas. And one idea that I think I had was uh, your video about Belleau, that 17-minute video, I believe. Those kind of shorter form videos, I think would be nice to have maybe alongside, maybe do 2 posts a week where it's the interview format and then the kind of more shorter length videos. I thoroughly enjoyed that Belleau Wood episode. I think now that you have more experience in the system and understand what you kind of need to do, those would be more easy to complete and also be more easier to listen to and to either watch or listen to. So I think that would be a nice idea, whether it's something that just random things that maybe you're interested in, or do like a pilgrimage of the week where you kind of go over it in one of those videos. So
When you say the Bella Wood video, are you talking about the Devil Dog Fountain video, or you're
yeah,
talking
sorry,
about?
the Devil Dog Fountain
Okay,
video.
I
I'm
wasn't
sorry.
sure because I did post like this drone footage of Bello, and that was maybe like a minute and a half or something. So I didn't know if you meant that one or if you meant the one where I was talking about my research on the Devil Dog Fountain.
No, I meant the whole
Okay,
fountain.
got it. Yeah. I mean, there's so many ideas, and that's what's so cool about this concept and what inspires me and why I get excited about doing this type of research and getting up in them. I mean, I could go on and on and on about pilgrimages, and I not only could I go on and on and on about pilgrimages, I want to hear other people go on and on and on about pilgrimages. And so yeah, this is definitely the research that I'm doing has landed in the post World War I pilgrimage space right now, and I probably am never going to get away from that because it's so fascinating, and there are so many dimensions that are left to be explored about it. But I did start this work being very broadly interested in pilgrimages and what connects all these types of pilgrimages and also the pilgrims. And so that's what I'm attempting to do with psychology of pilgrimage, is to kind of bring all of this together in one place for myself, but also for other people.
Yeah, you mentioned that you wanted kind of that community. And I think one idea perhaps would be posting those kind of shorter form videos to that community. So it's kind of a membership exclusive thing, which could drive more people and make that community. It's just an idea though.
Yeah, that's well, you're a young person. You think you have these kind of entrepreneurial ideas, I think, that are important. And also, one of the reasons I very much value your feedback and your opinion. I mean, besides the fact that you're my cherished daughter, I also value what you have to say about life. Well, I think we are probably at a good landing place. We've talked about the structural processes of starting. I call it structural process. I think that's the right way to say that about starting a podcast and what, especially a video podcast, and what that's been like. We've also talked about themes that have emerged from each of the episodes, or I should say, across all episodes, and then spent some time talking about feedback from guests and listeners, and also the event feedback, as well as recommendations for the future. I don't know how often I will be putting out a reflection episode. I can say that it will be regularly because I think that reflection and evaluation are important parts of any type of endeavor. And so it's also helpful for me to take a pause and reflect on what has happened from the beginning to this point, but then from this point to into the future. And I appreciate you taking the time, Ayla, to be here and to give me your thoughts and to have this conversation with me. It's been really helpful.
Absolutely, it's been awesome. been very fun. Do you have any questions for me?
What has been the most interesting thing you have learned from the psychology of pilgrimage?
And I'm going to keep going back to it's my favorite part, the change in someone. And although I can't necessarily boil it down to one point in a video or one point that you've made on your own, it's very it's cool, and it is there are really no words to describe it, how amazing it is to see that we are all different in our own respective, categories. We are different people, we have different experiences, but we have the same goal. We have the same goal when we go on a pilgrimage. We want to change. And I think that although I have already kind of known that, it put it more into perspective with this podcast to see other people other than just me and you or us and our family to talk about it and to see that it's not just the two of us, it's more global and it's more universal than we think it is. And it's been very awesome and beautiful to see that. So that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned is that my experience is my experience, but the kind of foundations of that experience are everyone's experience. So that's probably it.
Well said. I don't think I could have said it better myself. And thank you for being a guest. And thank you so much to all of the other guests who have made this a wonderful experience for me, and to all of the listeners and viewers who continue to engage. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes, to thank you. We appreciate you.